Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our Governance Made Easy webinar today, titled Setting Your Strategic Board Agenda. It's one of our favorites. My name's Sean McDonald, and I'll be your moderator for the next 40 odd minutes. Firstly, thanks for attending us today live. We really appreciate the effort you've made to be here and during our session. If you have any questions, please feel free to use either the Q&A button or the chat button on your toolbar. We'll be answering these questions throughout the session as we go, and we'll try and get through as many of these as we have time for. And finally, if you stay through till the end, which we of course hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we've got a special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with Board Pro, we're a board software provider that serve around 25,000 users around the globe. We enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more efficiently and effectively with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time, and we deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we're a software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. Now, the resources section on our website has hundreds of templates, guides, and white papers, all of which can be accessed at the link you see there, and they're all downloadable for free. Let me now introduce you to our speakers today and panelists. Steve Bowman is Managing Director of Conscious Governance, brings a great depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Stephen has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books on governance and strategy. Good afternoon to you, Stephen.
Hello to everyone from around the world.
Margot Foster, first time with us, so welcome. Margot has experience on a wide range of boards, principally not-for-profit, bringing her knowledge and insights to governance education with a really practical focus. She is a board governance specialist through her consultancy Boardroom Excellence, featuring her signature program, the Boardroom School. Margot is Vice President of Motorsport Australia, Chair of Sports Environment Alliance, Chair of 2 nomination committees, and chairs for both World Athletics and World Sailing. Welcome to you, Margot.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Georgia Henry is the founder and CEO of Henry Reed, a specialist culture and leadership advisory business that supports boards, CEOs, executives, and business owners to optimize their organization's effectiveness through their people and drive positive change for meaningful and measurable impact. Georgia draws on her 30-plus years experience supporting organizations to navigate the complexity of culture impact, leadership and employee behaviors, compliance issues, resistance to change, M&A integrations, and changing social expectations. Georgia is here today to talk to us about the importance of strategic planning. Welcome to you, Georgia.
Thanks, Sean. Nice to be here.
So for the next 40 odd minutes, just relax, listen, and add to the discussion by asking questions as we go. A full recording of the webinar, along with the slide deck, the white paper, the strategic agenda template, which we'll cover off towards the end, will be sent to you within about 24 hours of the webinar today. So let me now hand over to Stephen to get us started for the webinar.
Thanks for that, Sean. So today what we want to do is we're going to have some conversations because we've got some very experienced people, not only on the panel, but I recognise quite a few people that are in the audience as well too. So if you've got questions or comments or you want to add to something, then type it into the either the Q&A or the chat, whichever works for you. And let's pick up some really good insights from our conversations today. Now, one of the issues always is for any of you who've done board reviews or been involved in board reviews, guess what the most common complaint is from just about every director? We're not strategic enough. And the issue with that is they're not quite sure what that means, though. So one of the great ways to actually help keep our directors, our board, and our senior executive team, our executive leadership team, really focused on their greatest gift, which is, or should be, creating the future, then what we need to do is to actually set our board meetings to support that, rather than the typical board meeting, which is, let's see how busy the staff are and read all the reports that we're getting just to make sure that we know that everyone's very busy. So we'll have a talk about some very practical, useful techniques. And at the end, we'll spend a little bit of time going over the thinking behind a strategic board agenda. And we'll show you an example. It's not the only way of doing it, but the thinking behind it's the most important part. And Margot and Georgia have huge amounts of experience in this, so they've agreed to come in with anecdotes and stories and to lead us down slightly different paths when we need to go down there. So the first issue here is that often the biggest problem is how the board meetings are structured. And when you look at it, to be quite blunt, now keep us back on that one, Sean. To keep us really focused on the chair owns the board agenda. It is not something that should be developed as a sort of town hall meeting where you go to each of your board directors and say, what do you want on the agenda? What do you want on the agenda? Because then you'll get all sorts of pet projects. Now, the key thing behind setting up your board agenda is, first of all, for every person to know that the chair at law owns the agenda. Now, they will listen to the directors. You should listen to your directors. You'll take on board strategic issues, but they have to be alerted to prior to the board meeting, not at the board meeting. There should be no surprises coming up in terms of new topics that people want tabled, unless they've been agreed with the chair prior to the board meeting. So just understand that the chair owns that sequence of events. Georgia.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the issues that I've seen when doing culture audits and looking at governance structures is that there are organisations where the CEO sets the board agenda and really is driving that agenda. What are your thoughts on that, Steve? Because I just see that completely disempowering the board and it being hijacked.
Well, it's interesting because the typical way of doing this, which is actually quite good, is either the company secretary or the CEO or the executive assistant to the chair, whoever it might be that's in there, someone drafts the agenda. Then it goes to the chair to have a look at the agenda to see whether or not that's in line with what they want. Then if a director wants something on the agenda, they petition the chair to add something, particularly if they've seen a draft of the agenda. But in the end, the final say on the agenda is the chair's. And you often, as a chair, you don't need to use it, but sometimes it's very useful to know that, because we had a case just recently where there were some directors, one of them was a lawyer, who then used that to try and hammer home pet projects on the agenda. And the chair didn't feel they could say no, because after all, this other one was a lawyer. Whereas, in fact, the chair has the right to say, no, we'll take this offline, we'll build up a case for it to be on there. You have to convince me it's a strategic issue that is worthy of our board time. And that's not a bad phrase to use. Margot, your thoughts?
Oh, look, I agree. And I think that if, the CEO or someone, the co-sec drafts an agenda, sends it to the chair, and it becomes a sort of a standard but not immutable document that then, if it does need to have change, then if you've allowed a bit of time at the end of a meeting, you can say, well, we like this agenda or we don't like it, or perhaps we could think about doing it differently. So it's never static, and I think that that's the important thing to remember. Just because it's always been done this way is not the reason to continue doing it the same old way, which you'll address, Steve, in terms of the strategic layout of the agenda.
Yeah. So here's some top tips for you. Oh, I like this. Jen said the tail doesn't wag the dog. The board chair sets the agenda and manages the relationship. Yeah, absolutely spot on. The difficulty, I just go back to that. One of the big difficulties is that many chairs have never had experience chairing anything, or if they had experience, it's not been particularly good. An experienced chair can bring along a whole lot of bad habits. So one of the things always, just as an aside, is whenever we're doing governance reviews, there's always a recommendation in there that if they're not currently doing it, they should send all the chairs of their board committees and also of the board itself to do a chairing course, a half-day board chairing course. The IOD in New Zealand, the Institute of Company Directors, the Governance Institute, we do them. Probably Georgia does them, Margot does them. So the main thing is to get your chairs to understand what it's like to be a chair, but also mix it with other chairs so that they can start to get you get the stories from the trenches, that sort of thing. So please build that into your budget for board support to actually get your board committee chairs and also your board chair. If they haven't done a chair course in the last 5 years or so, send them along. It can be a lifesaver, quite honestly. Now, here's a couple of things with your agendas. These are missed out so often. Please put your vision at the top of the agenda, your vision statement or your purpose statement or whatever you call it. The thing that gives you the insight about here's the difference that we want to make as an organisation. Because the purpose of putting that up there is not for everyone to put their hand on their heart, stand up and recite it at the start of the board meeting. Purpose of having it there is to remind us of why we're having this meeting. The only reason we're having this meeting is not because the coffee's good or that we're having this meeting to actually create this vision. And if we keep that up there, we can then use it when we need to. So as a director, you can help steer the conversation towards something that is probably a little more focused by using the elements of your vision statement to bring people back on track again. If, for example, you're having a conversation that's going around in circles and people are getting a bit het up, then just say to the chair, look, through you, Chair, if I could, can we refocus on the 3 key elements of our vision statement and start reframing our conversation around these 2 or 3 key things? And it is an amazing restart and reframing that can really facilitate. Margot, what have you found in terms of using vision or purpose to help reframe?
Well, until I enjoyed this presentation last year as an observer, I have never been on a board where a vision statement has been at the top of the papers. And so for the board that I do chair now, that's what we do. And we've done it a couple of times, and it's just that reminder. As soon as people open up their board papers, it's right at the top and they can say, yep, this is what we're here for. So I commend it as a really good idea to focus, a good way to focus people for the rest of the meeting.
And do it for your senior executive team as well, and do it for your project teams. If they've got a meeting, they've got an agenda, put the vision up there, but don't just have it as something small. Put it big and bold, and also make sure the 2 or 3 key elements of that vision are in italics, blinking red, whatever it needs to be to actually focus people on these are the 3 key things. Georgia, anything to add to that?
I'm a huge advocate of this, and not only on agendas, but on the top of your strategic plans, any of your corporate documents, because you should continually be asking the question, for what purpose? So as we come up to problems or things that we're going to discuss, things that are going to take our time, if you can't relate the for what purpose question back to why your organisation exists and where you're going and align with your vision, then it's going to derail you from the discussions and the activity and the investment and the commitments that you need to make. So I'm a huge advocate for putting this on, continually reminding yourself of your purpose and your vision as your key guidance to answering the question for what purpose when you're considering strategic decisions.
Yeah, and Mark's made a comment too. You always link it back to, so how's this going to help us achieve this vision. Some of you heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. There's only two types of vision statements. You'll love this. There's those that work and those that don't. There's only the two types. Now, the question then becomes, how do we know our vision or our purpose statement works? Because you use it shamelessly in everything, because it provides you with a focus that you cannot get anywhere else. Now, the next logical thing is, when should our vision statement change? And the answer to that is very simple. When you can't use it, when it's not providing you with value. So as long as your vision is providing you with the focus and the value, then use it in everything.
Agreed.
So now, create a cover sheet. This one's a really interesting one, because I've seen a number of boards where they start off their board meeting and they have a cover sheet on their board agenda that illustrates an anecdote or a story from the last couple of months that illustrate either one of the cultural components or one of the key focuses of the organisation. We do a lot of work in Dubai, and one of the organisations over there, multi-billion-dollar organisation, they, at the start of their board meeting, before they get into the agenda, they have a short video, 30-second video from one of their staff at the coalface, and they've got hundreds of thousands of staff. A short video from one of their staff who went above and beyond the call of duty when it came to safety. And what they do is that they do that just to remind the directors that, in particular in this industry, safety is an absolute not negotiable area. And the board meeting that I've sat in many of their board meetings, but the board meeting, this particular one that just stood out to me, is that they had this short video of a relatively young, sort of mid-30s, I can say that the age I am now, so relatively young, mid-30s engineer, who at the end of his shift noticed that the pressure in one of the pipes seemed to be a little bit off, but he was due to leave his shift. But he stayed there to monitor it until the new person came on, and together they figured out what it was. That's just, these little anecdotal stories mean so much, and they did that to the directors at the start of the meeting because the chair wanted to make sure that every director understood that safety, health and safety, was at the core of what we do. Yeah. That simple little story just really kept with me. Georgia.
I think so much time in board meetings is spent looking at data or analysing where we've been or what we're planning to do. But humanising through stories is one of the most valuable tools to actually bring life to the data, to interpret the way forward, and for me, always keeping people at the centre of everything that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. If I may say too that that sort of approach might have made a difference at both Boeing with their recent issue with the door flying out, and even back to Dreamworld. Honouring the importance of what's happening on the ground, front and centre.
Yeah, and make it meaningful, not just a PR exercise. So now the key thing, what I want to do is to talk about the thinking behind structuring your board agendas. It's very easy to have a set of reports that go to the board, but no real structure about why those reports are there. Just because you've been busy doesn't mean that you need to report on how busy you've been. So strategy always ahead of operational matters. So, and we'll see an example later on. If you have a lot of operational papers in there and they appear in the board agenda and you want to talk about them, you are creating an operational board just through that. And so the rabbit hole of, if you have a very detailed paper in there, then you are inviting the directors to get into detail. If you have strategic insights that are supported by detail, but that detail is in an addendum to the board papers that is optional to read because the strategic insights part of that has covered into account all of that detail, then you're less likely to set the culture up where your board are wanting more detail, more detail, more detail, more detail. Often the reason that we want more detail is because we can't figure out what the strategic insights are from what it is that we're seeing. So we want to delve into more detail just in case something magical appears. We've got We've got to start stopping that and actually really prioritize in the CEO's report, for example, all right? The great CEO's report typically have a whole lot of things in there that about what has happened over the last month or 2 months or 3 months, whatever it might be. But a truly great CEO's report is one that will also highlight, here are the 2 questions that I'd like the board to consider, or here are the 2 insights that we need to start looking at. Now, if there is a paper, if there is an element in the CEO's report that we actually want the board to discuss, pull it out as a separate discussion paper. Don't hide it in the report. Make it easy for our directors to actually focus on the things that are worthy of their time, not just monitoring as such. Margot, your thoughts as a chair in this?
Oh, yeah, look, I agree entirely, Steve. I think that's, can't disagree.
I'm doing well so far then. We'll get on to the more controversial ones later on. So always strategy ahead. And so therefore at the start of your agenda, please don't have all of the operational reports and then get people to talk about them, because you're already setting up the mentality, the thought processes of delving deep into operations rather than the strategic insights and the powerful, brave conversations that we have to have as a board that are actually creating the future.
It's such a comfort zone, though, and I think that's part of the problem. Is talking about operational issues can be very comfortable for a board, and it does waste so much time. And then you get from all parties this real dissatisfaction in what's been achieved in a board meeting.
Yeah, because those operational things are actually interesting, particularly if you come from that sector yourself.
That's it, exactly.
So, okay, now one of the other... Oh, sorry, Margot, go.
I'm just going to quickly add too that one of the ways of getting easily distracted is delving into your action items list too, which is often incredibly operational. So you've got to be wary of that.
Yeah. When you've got action items, the same thinking should go into those. Instead of going over them and getting someone to read them out or to, in fact, even summarise, pull out the 1 or 2 big things that are worthy of board discussion. Here's our strategic question that we've got for you here, or here are some issues that we want the board to further discuss as a separate discussion item. So start thinking from that point of view. Kevin said all of our management reports, and then it flashed off my screen. All our management reports are for noting and not discussion, unless someone identifies something strategic arising out of the report. Awesome. The only thing I would add to that, Kevin, is, and if they do find something, to alert the chair prior to the board meeting so the chair can actually bring that forward. So one of the things always that is a very powerful technique is a couple of days before the board meeting, have the chair and the CEO available for a set period of time, usually about half an hour, where any director can call in with either a question or a clarification on something, or they want the chair to take something off the four-noting agenda and put it onto the agenda for discussion. It is not a time where you have a mini meeting before the meeting. You never want to hear at a board meeting, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand this. Can you explain it more?" That should never happen at a board meeting. It should happen prior to the board meeting. If there's a clarification required, for example, what did you mean by this? That you shouldn't be asking that at the board meeting. You should ask it prior to the board meeting, and any clarification or further information should go out to all directors. A chair told me not that long ago, they said, "Oh, we tried it, Steve, it didn't work." And I said, "What didn't work?" He said, "Oh, when a director called in and asked for some extra information, we sent that director the information, and then the rest of the directors thought there was secret squirrel business going on." And so that just made that an issue. Question from the floor. Sean. Someone have a question? While we're waiting, Georgia?
There is a question that's popped up here that says, do you suggest that the data or operational matters be delved into at a subcommittee, for example, quality and risk subcommittee. So that is getting the committees to delve into the data and operational matters.
That's exactly their role. The subcommittees of the board are the ones who do the heavy lifting.
That's right.
They're the ones, when you get stuff up, you should have comfort that that board committee has verified the veracity of that data and that they have had the first crack at determining what the big strategic issues are from that committee or from that report that is actually worthy of board time. So typically, I don't want to see as a paper that we go through in detail, the minutes of that board committee. What I do want to see is I can have as an addendum the minutes of the committee or a link to it, but I want to know what are the issues that that committee want the board to spend time discussing. So they have to think that way.
I think some of the...
Oh, I was just going to say, yes, the last thing a board needs is the minutes per se. You want the report of the issues and the recommendations. And I have seen committee minutes which are like a sort of an internal chat and think, what's the outcome of this? So really good point to make.
I think too, Margot, one of the things that I've seen is that the roles of the committee and what they're there to achieve is not actually very clear. And so there is a lot of inefficiency in committee meetings, and there's a lot of crossover between executive roles and committee roles and a misunderstanding. And that then really muddies sort of the relevance of what comes to the board as well.
Yes, and compounded if you have too many committees which are sort of unclear and overlap. Yeah.
Someone's asked a really interesting question, which is around, okay, so we tend to put our operational reports, I'm reframing it because I'm not reading the question now. We tend to put our operational stuff at the start of the meeting so that the staff don't have to wait around. Again, that's a bit like the tail wagging the dog. Can I just say that? Yes, if you're going to have staff present, have them do it at the start of the meeting. They're presenting about strategic issues or questions that they want to cover with the board, not reporting against what I can read. If there is an issue that is of strategic importance that we need to discuss, and the staff member is part of doing that, have them at the front of the meeting, but it's still around the big issues, the strategic issues. Finance, for example, finance reports, typically structurally correct, really good data, absolutely useless, because what they're not doing is helping the board focus on the bigger questions. So, for example, if you've got your profit and loss statement, then I want to know, there's only two things I want to know from the profit and loss statement as a director. What are the reasons for the variance? And what do they mean going forward? And the second thing is, and what are the strategic implications that we need to be thinking about as a board that these finances are giving us a hint of what might be into the future? So on your P&L, make sure that your reasons for variance are on the same page as the actual figures. Don't flip over 3 pages and then all of a sudden there's reasons for variance with a little number 1, and then you've got to flip back another 3 pages to see what they align to. No, you put them on the one page and you have a heading at the bottom or at the start of the P&L report, strategic implications for board discussion. Get us to focus on that. Otherwise, you'll have the accounting people get into the detail. We've already got a finance committee that does that. We want to know the so whats that come out of this rather than the actual detail. Same thing with your balance sheet. Don't just tell me a balance sheet. Most people don't know how to read the damn things anyway. A balance sheet is a set of relationships. Tell me what the key relationships are, the bottom of the balance sheet or a separate page. What's our liquidity ratio? And what are the implications for us going forward? What do we need to know in 3 or 4 years' time so we can start to prepare for these things? These are worthy of the board time, not the, yes, we've all read the balance sheet. Any questions? No, that's a waste of everyone's time. So don't get, and then cash flow statements, all right? So I'd like to see a cash flow statement, but I want to know if we're getting into difficult area in advance of us getting into difficult areas. So I'm always looking for how close are we to the various trigger points that we've identified that we need to really sit up and take notice in terms of cash flow. But again, your finance audit risk committee should be doing the hard lifting on that, and they should be bringing to the board the implications of this or the focus of this, not just plonking a MYOB or QuickBooks spit out of the financial reports. Okay, now we do need to move on a little bit here. So one of the things I'd like to really give to you to look at with your own board agendas is the notion of a consent agenda. And typically there's three types of papers. Those papers that are for noting only. Notice the words for noting only. It doesn't say for noting only unless someone wants to talk about it. All right, so it should be for noting only. If you see something on there that you think as a director should be discussed and there's a strategic issue, you petition the chair prior to the board meeting. That itself is going to save you like 20 to 30% of the time of your board meetings. Never have a verbal report. They're not worthwhile. What is a verbal report? You know, we got the CEO's report. CEO, do you just want to go over it quickly? No. The stuff in there. So let's pull out the stuff that we want to spend our time talking about. We've covered all the others in those items in there. So moving on. So consent agenda for noting only, for discussion, or for decision. They're the three types of papers in advance. Color code them. All right. So very simple. If you have something that's for noting, it might be orange, all right? But always have the words in there because you never know when someone's colorblind. So always have the words in there, but also color code them as well too, so that we know that all those items that are for decision, typically we'll have up front, we'll have those items for discussion, possibly next, and those items for noting should be at the end of the agenda. They can be interspersed before, and that's where color coding becomes useful. We've covered the ratio side of things. And I've just given examples of the types of ratios, particularly when it comes to your balance sheet. What are the key ratios and any other key ratios that you want? Risk management reports, probably the worst. Mm-hmm. No, actually, finance is usually the worst reported, closely followed by risk. Too many times you find risk reports, you table the risk register. I'm not interested in the risk register. That's why we've got a risk committee or a finance audit risk committee. I want to know as a director, what are our top 3 or 4 key risks? How well are we managing those and how are we leveraging them shamelessly? Because from those risks come the greatest opportunities. So we need to understand what they are. We need to understand they're being really well managed, even if you can't manage them, like things like changing government policy. You can't manage that, but there are certain things that you can do to make sure it's less likely to occur and that we can deal with it if it does occur. And I want to know what are the strategic opportunities and also the potential revenue opportunities that come from managing these risks. So, and if they're within our risk appetite, and does that risk appetite actually still hold true with what we're doing? So please look at your risk management reports, not just activities based around your risk registers. Yeah. And yes, we've identified 3 more risks.
It's one of the areas that I see when we do culture audits is so badly managed, even to the point where an organisation that was in a whole lot of trouble had all the risks identified in their risk registers. They had appropriate actions to mitigate those risks identified. But it didn't go any further than that. The action wasn't happening and the board wasn't picking up or asking questions around how are those risks being mitigated, what's the long-term strategic impact of those risks. So just because they exist doesn't actually mean that that's doing you any good. So I agree, Steve, that the risks is one of the areas that I see that boards really need to focus on more effectively.
My view is if the board can start looking at risk as an exciting area, not exciting as in, oh my God, we're stuffed, but as an exciting area that actually unlocks opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise thought of, that's where we want to get the culture of our board when it comes to risk. Margot?
Oh, I think it's really important too to ensure in your board papers a heading from the managers who are creating a heading that says risk. So that not only are you getting the information, but what are the implications? What are the risks arising from potentially actually whatever, from what's being presented from the managers who are dealing with the information on a day-to-day basis, and the directors may or may not be aware. And it just keeps risk front of mind on particular topics, even if, the broader organisational risks aren't necessarily being dealt with in that paper.
And I think the key issue there is that if the board sees risk as the flip side of opportunity, then we start looking at risk as strategic advantage rather than risk as a compliance issue. And that's where we need to get our boards, and it just doesn't happen most of the time.
I'd probably say so too, if I may, that risk, compliance, and strategy are the things that boards find most difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Oh, you've nailed it with that one. Exactly. So, Eleanor's written, as a company lawyer who's not the company secretary, how can we help affect these changes without stepping on the toes of executive team members? Okay, what you don't do is go for the jugular of the staff who wrote the report. What you do is, first off, model the behaviour you would like to see everyone else have. So you be the strategic mentor around that table. You ask the strategic questions. And then sit down with the chair after the meeting and say, hey, can we actually start to look at helping the staff to come up with what the strategic issues might be that are worthy of our discussion? And maybe, and I strongly recommend this, send our staff to do a board report writing course. We've mentioned before about sending chairs off to do a chairing course. Well worthwhile sending your staff off, the senior exec team, to do a board reporting course, because then it gets you to focus on how do we craft our reports that are actually useful for directors rather than a historical record of how busy we've been. Just a thought. We do need to move on, so let's have a look at the next one, which is dashboards. Okay, they're very pretty and most of them are useless. So what we need with dashboards is certainly good at dashboards, but I want to have underneath that a heading that says strategic implications for board discussion. Don't just tell me about all these lovely 1 or 2 pages of dashboards. Help me focus on the 1 or 2 that is worthy of our discussion. Don't make me search for it. You'll see at the very end, we've got a little thing called Where's Wally, all right? Where's Wally is, don't make me search for Wally. Tell me where Wally is so that I can focus on it straight away. With dashboards, don't ask me to search for Wally in the dashboards. I want to know what are the issues in here that is worthy of our discussion. Don't make me work for it. Do the work for me beforehand. Thoughts on dashboards, folks?
Agree. So many. There was certainly a phase where every board had millions of dashboards, and people would look at them and go, well, "What question do I ask?" Because there was no information to explain what they meant. Because they might have looked a bit different from last month, but then why the variation? So really, explanation.
Yeah. One of the biggest questions that we should essentially have stenciled on every report before it gets submitted is, "So what?"
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So, leading and lagging. Most reports, particularly strategic plans, are the worst at this, tend to be lagging indicators of activity. We want to actually look at leading indicators that will give us an insight into what might be, and these are sort of whispers of where things might be. If you're not sure what a leading or a lagging indicator is, do some research on it. Get your staff to look at leading and lagging indicators. Ask, are these leading or lagging indicators? I guarantee in most of your board reports, most of the indicators will be lagging, which is historically correct, but strategically useless for us to some extent. Okay, next one, Sean. We've pretty much covered that. Make sure you're measuring the right things. Measures of activities aren't necessarily the right things. So again, it comes into leading and lagging. Next one. A great idea on your agenda is to have a CFO and a CEO declaration which says that we're solvent, that we are up to date with our payments. A compliance schedule is a very, very simple tool to use. We've run sessions on compliance schedules. I've just done 15 videos about compliance schedules. I didn't think I knew so much about them. But they're very powerful tools to actually help the board understand what do we make sure that we have to be compliant with, and CFO and CEO, we want a declaration or an attestation report from you probably every 6 months that we are actually in compliance with all the things that we need to be. Right, next one. Now, can we bring up on screen the draft agenda, please, Sean?
Yep, just give me a second.
Now, while he's doing that, Margot, Georgia, if you had to choose one or two things about creating a strategic board agenda, what would those two big things that you found either really useful or destructive if they don't occur? Margot, kick off.
Oh, look, I think the inherent structure of making sure that the directors understand the areas where they've got to focus on, and it's clearly marked, and the papers are specifically directed to that. So, yeah, I'm fully agreeing with the idea of having the really important stuff up front and the understanding, as we've talked about before, that we're not going to spend time on the operationally focused, historic, retrospective stuff. And I think that's part of the attitude building, which is an education process of the whole board, because the default is always to the easy, to the the historical, what could we have done better at that awards event or whatever, which adds absolutely nothing. So it's part of the education and the structure, and it also requires the leading by the chair to make sure that time is not wasted.
Yeah.
And time was going
And
to
if
be
the chair doesn't do that, then you as a director can assist the chair by prompting the chair in an appropriately respectful manner.
Yes.
But at the same time, you can be the strategic mentor for the people around the table. And if you're willing to be that, people will change, but you've got to be that yourself first. Georgia.
I was going to say that the main thing is time. Allocating the correct amount of time, keeping to time, making sure that issues are covered effectively, because that is one of the issues that I hear most about, as well as that we didn't have enough time, or we had to put it off because it wasn't discussed, and these could be really important issues. So managing the time in setting the agenda and during the meeting, to me, are some of the most important areas.
I think too that rigidly adhering to an agenda just because it's been set, if circumstances have changed between when the papers were published and when you're having the meeting, so that if you need to rework it so that you're spending more time, or you get the meeting to agree that you're going to spend a bit of extra time over and above what you intended to deal with those strategic matters, is really critical too.
And the chair is the key to that, because they run it. They're the ones who actually have that control. Let me quickly take you through the thinking behind this agenda structure. So if you see at the top there, it says insert vision statement here. That's pretty obvious. We've talked about that. Go down to the next one. To be present, board of directors, management, apologies. You'll love this one, apologies. Never accept a director's apology, ever. Never accept their apology unless they have contacted the chair or the CEO to say, I have received the board papers, I have read the board papers, I have no questions. But if they don't do that, then you have every right not to accept their apology, because they haven't shown that they've actually participated. And it is a great technique to be used if you have a director who just doesn't turn up, nor do they do anything that actually contributes, and they're essentially taking up the time of the board. In your constitution, there'll be a clause that says you're no longer deemed to be a suitable director if you're dead, unsound mind, convicted of an indictable offence, not attend 3 board meetings without the permission of the board. Don't give them permission unless they've shown that they are actually participating by being part of reading the board papers. That's controversial. I love that one.
It is.
Okay, now having a look at item number 3, declarations. Please don't call it conflict of interest. There's no conflict until the board decides there's a conflict. Just call it declarations of interest. And then you'll have your standard interest register, and then any director who might have an interest, there might be a conflict there, but it's the board's decision, not the individual's decision.
Yes.
Confirmation of the agenda. This item number 4, this is really powerful. This is where all of the items that are for noting only, we confirm as for noting having been read, and that's it. They're now formally confirmed as part of the board. So confirmation of the agenda, including acceptance of all the starred items or the items for noting, and you list down what agenda items they are there. There's the formal record that we as a board attest, A, we've read them, and B, that they are now formally part of the board agenda. All knocked over in no time at all. confirmation of minutes, confirmation of board action items, strategic matters. Okay, and this again is where you put those big items up there, either report against a strategic plan that have discussion items, or a CEO's report on strategic priorities, whatever that might be, right up front. The board operations, so this is where your various committee reports or discussions come in. But again, if they're for noting, they're for noting. If there's something needs discussing, pull it out as a separate discussion paper. And you'll note the colour coding there. Green is for note. It doesn't matter what colours you use, but always have always have the names in there. Now, the next lot is really important, and most boards don't do this. Professional board development. Every second or third board meeting, I would bring in an external stakeholder and have them address the board about what their top 2 strategic issues are in the next 10 years and what they think the implications for your organisation might be. And that's a really powerful way of deep diving into keeping the board focused on what's happening around them, not just the detail of what they know. So very powerful technique. And you do the same thing with staff. 2 times a year, bring in a staff member in charge of a particular area and ask them to talk about the top 2 strategic issues in the next 10 years in this particular area that they've got a responsibility for. Okay, can you move down, Sean? Here we go. Yep, so that's all in the agenda. Keep going. So you should build in on an annual basis at least one deep dive in a strategic issue, and you take one board meeting where there is no agenda. We just do a deep dive into artificial intelligence or cybersecurity or what's happening with NDIS or whatever it might be. But you take one of your board meetings, don't tack on a mini board meeting onto it, and you have that as a strategic deep dive where you can get external people coming in if you need be. Now, the rest of that agenda you can read through. We do separate sessions on board only session, the board in camera or board only. Whether that should be at the start or at the end of the meeting is really up to the board. There's pros and cons for each one of them. So they're the key elements that come from setting our strategic board agenda. Now, Sean has asked, can we go over for a few minutes because there's some fantastic questions in there. Sean, can I leave that up to you to lead us through that?
Sure thing. Right. This one was from Nick. Nick would love to get your thoughts on directors only time in the agenda, where we add that particular note in the agenda structure.
Yeah. Margot, do you want to kick off on that?
Oh, look, it's an interesting one, as you just said, Steve. I was on one board and we had an in-camera at the beginning and the end of every meeting, which was, I thought, overkill. I do think it's useful. I think it's also useful for a reflection on how the board meeting's gone, as well as discussing other matters. But it's really important always, if the CEO is out of the room, to make sure that he or she understands it's either about them or not about them too. You don't want them leaving the meeting and thinking, God, am I about to be sacked or something like that? So really clear communication about that. And look, some boards need it more than others, but I think it's a useful thing to have on the radar and to apply from meeting to meeting, just to have that check-in, particularly too, if you're having a lot of meetings online where you really don't get that interaction that you ordinarily would in a face-to-face meeting. And
I've often found it's interesting, Margot, with board-only sessions, if they run at the start of the meeting, and about 50% do, the really good ones use it to say, well, here are the 2 key issues we need to spend most of our time on. And they agree that in the board-only session. So it's not just about talking about CEO's performance or bad behaviour or anything like that. They can actually set the tone of that meeting in that short board only.
I think if it's done at the beginning of the meeting, it has to be really time limited, because otherwise the staff are waiting outside sort of endlessly.
It's horrible.
For an hour or 50 minutes, as I had on one occasion, and just nightmarish all round.
Yep. Georgia, anything to add?
No, I agree with all of that.
Okay.
And I think sometimes they'll be very short board-only sessions, and sometimes, depending on the issues, you need to allow the time that the board needs.
Yep. Okay, Sean.
Last question. As a CEO, can I expect to be given some insight into in-camera portions of the meeting, post-meeting from the chair?
And the answer to that, you see all the head nods going on, and the answer to that is yes. If there is a decision that comes out of that in-camera meeting, that decision has to be minuted. And whilst you probably won't get to see the minutes of that board-only session. Typically, and I know Board Pro has a capacity where you can actually have those minutes that are only accessible by directors. But if there's anything that comes out of it that is a decision, or if there's anything that comes out of it where that in-camera session says, Chair, you need to chat with the CEO, absolutely, there should be some conversation that goes on about that. It shouldn't be secret squirrel business again. Anything you want to add, Margot or Georgia, on that?
I think it's essential for building trust that there is that level of interaction and transparency.
Oh, look, I agree. I heard a horror story about a CEO who was sat outside for X amount of time, which turned into X times 10, and he got no feedback on what the in-camera was about, and it just his trust and confidence crumbled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else there, Sean?
No, that's it, Stephen. We're all good.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's wrap this up. Thank you, everyone, for being part of us. And Margot and Georgia, I love just having these conversations with you and the real life experience and all of that. Thank you so much for that. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, everybody.